Bom dia, boa tarde, boa noite, or whatever the case may be. My name is Marcus, and I am the host of the Black Brazil Today YouTube channel, as well as the blackbraziltoday.com blog, where I analyze Brazil from the perspective of race. So tonight, I wanted to try something a little bit different. This has been a presentation I've been wanting to do for some time, and I've finally figured out a way to try to make this happen. You know, I've mentioned in past videos that there is a brother in Brazil, in a city called Belo Horizonte, and I've been knowing this guy online for about a year and a half, and we've had conversations via apps, we've had conversations via Zoom. Most of our conversations are through a phone app, WhatsApp. A lot of you may be familiar with it. And, for the first year or so that I knew him, we explored a lot of topics. He knew about my blog. He actually had a presence online. Also, he was on YouTube. He was on, I think he had an Apple podcast, several different social media outlets that he was working with. And, we had talked for a while about collaborating on a few videos, and, the topic would come up from time to time. We just never got around to doing it. And then about 6 months ago, he started just informing me about just certain things that are going on in Brazil and his opinion on them. He's a guy who follows much of the discussion on relationships and red pill content. He talks a lot about what he views as the outcome of like the feminist movement in Brazil. He's talked about how Americans seem to interpret Brazilian women. And so when this whole discussion of passport bros came up, it was something that, even though we hadn't talked about the topic, because of the previous topics we had covered, it was natural that eventually the topic of passport bros would come up. He was, we were on the same page on a lot of topics. Most of the time in the first year that we were, getting to know each other, I told him a lot about what I thought about he knew that, or I told him that much of my content on my blog had to do with, as I say, analyzing Brazil from the perspective of race. And we agreed on a lot of topics. There were other topics that he couldn't get with, and that's what I say. You don't have to agree on everything. It's just a point that, be respectful about everybody's opinion. If you don't agree on a certain topic, you can beat it up, you can debate it. And if you still don't come to sway one person or the other to come to your side, or they pull you to their side, leave the topic alone, keep it moving. Just, you can continue to revisit these topics, but keep the discussion going. Don't let it get ugly or anything. That's something that I have a problem with, what's going on online these days. Just discussions online or personal, face-to-face or debates. Oftentimes it just gets very personal. People start with personal attacks and it just gets out of hand. Certain views that I've had about race in Brazil, obviously he's a Brazilian guy, Black Brazilian. And so I respect the fact that we won't agree on everything about race. I mean, he grew up there, and I'm a person who has spent more than 20 years trying to figure Brazil out, particularly from the racial perspective. So I don't have a problem that he disagrees with some of the things that I say. I'm going to disagree with some of the things that he says. That's not a problem at all. I think things are a little bit more, there are some conclusions that I come to that I think are more or less obvious. When we get into this discussion about what's called palmitagem in Brazil, where a lot of Black males and Black females in Brazil have been accused by, the opposite sex, opposite gender, of having preferences for white partners. And, my stance, my position on this for the longest time, I was talking about this long before most Black Brazilians were even talking about it, because they were under the impression that, hey, we mix here, so what's the problem? It wasn't until, I would say, maybe the early part of the second decade of the 21st century where it became an open discussion, like, okay, why do we mix here so much? And so when I had these discussions with this guy in Minas, he's made it clear, like, look, I date all types of women. I don't discriminate. I'm black, but I just, I'll date any type of woman. And I'm saying, I know there are a lot of people who think that way. It's not that I'm condemning that. I have dated various races of women myself, but I reached a certain point in my life where my perspective just changed because I just came to see the world differently than how I did, when I was dating across racial lines. I'm not going to condemn anybody who dates against racial lines. I just found a certain value in being with people who look like me, right? So as I said, within the last 6 months, I expressed interest in some of the topics that he was talking about, and I expressed interest in him and diversifying some of the topics that I talk about on the blog as well as the YouTube channel. For those of you who have followed the blog for a while, you'll notice that I'm not posting a whole lot of content on the blog anymore because I'm focusing more on the YouTube market. But I was getting increasingly intrigued by some of the points that he was making about how he sees relationships, women, feminism, red pill, and all of this stuff from a Brazilian perspective, because this discussion is going on in Brazil also. And so as I focused so long on the racial topic, there was over the years on my blog, I come to conclude that in order to even just look at the race issue, I have to be able to consider other facets of society and how these play a factor in the race issue. So, I started exploring a little bit more of that. These are some topics that I've been introducing over the last few months, and I'm going to keep that moving because it's some really interesting discussions that's coming out of Brazil. I'm watching some of the content that's, men and as well as women are making out of Brazil. The different perspectives. And I says, wow, this is something I definitely want to introduce to my audience at Black Brazil Today. So, when we first started talking about doing a collaboration, he put it out there and we never really moved on it. A couple months went by, I remember back in September, he had watched a discussion between two African-American males on some YouTube channel. I can't even remember. I remember watching it briefly. And I just remember he sent me an audio message and he was fuming. He was like, Mark, you have got to do a video and talk to these African-American guys because these guys don't know anything about Brazilian women. And it's obvious from what the things that they're saying in their videos. He says, you've been coming to this country for 2 decades. You lived here. You know how things are in Brazil. You should make a video and talk about this so that people really understand Brazilian culture, Brazilian women, Brazilian history, because most guys who just all of a sudden fall in love with Brazil, mostly because of the image they have of Brazilian women, they generally don't really know what they're talking about. And so I said, yeah, let's do a collaboration one day. It never happened. And then later on, when I was really ready to get into possibly doing a collab with him, he started taking all of his content down off, online, because he felt that the environment, the way the media is dominated by the left in Brazil these days, he felt that he couldn't openly express his opinion without facing some type of retaliation. So, he didn't want to come onto the show and show his image, So I respected that. I know there's men I know in the United States who feel like there's certain things that they just can't say. I mean, thing could be 100% right, but in the environment that we're in, there's certain things that you can't say. It's like even on YouTube, there's videos where I've posted where if you're trying to monetize a video, you get either a green signal, like it's fully monetized, a yellow signal where, it's going to be partially monetized, or a red signal that says we can't monetize this video. You can't earn anything from this video because of the topic that you're talking about. It's too controversial. You're saying this, you're saying that. So in order for him to participate in a collaboration, he felt like, well, he needed to have more of a invisible presence. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just play some of the audio. After this whole Austin Holloman stuff blew up in the last few days. He says, man, we need to do something. You know, we've been talking about doing a collaboration for months. Let's at least do something where I can express my views. And I says, you know, I'm going to give you the platform. I says, how do you want to do it? He says, I'm going to send you an audio message and you can do what you want with it on your show. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm not featuring his image, but I will present the audio that he sent to me. And then I'm going to, you know, interject my own personal views in between when he hits on a topic that I feel like I need to explain. So with that said, that's the way I'm going to do this video. It's almost going to be kind of like a reaction to what he's saying, because he says many of the things that I've believed for a long time, but I think it's important that my audience hear it from a Black Brazilian guy. You know, he speaks pretty good English. I think you won't have a problem understanding what he's saying. So let's just check out some of the stuff that he has to say in this audio. And I'll be checking in from time to time to interpret or, you know, add something to it.
What's going on, Marcus? I'm JJ, and we've been talking about a lot of stuff since last year, and we really intensified some conversation, especially in regards of feminism in Brazil, especially Black feminism in Brazil. As you got more interested in this subject matter, and we've been exchanging a lot of thoughts, a lot of ideas, talking about these things. You lived here, so you got a glimpse and actually what it's been like to live in Brazil. So you understand more the complexity of things here in Brazil that a lot of guys are not aware. And I after this Austin case, I decided to send you this message, trying to clarify some things or give some more information for an insider perspective. You know, I'm from Belo Horizonte city. I'm born and raised in Brazil, state of Minas Gerais, and you know I'm on the streets. I'm online too, and I've been dealing with a different caliber of people. You know, from the bottom to up. Of course, I don't have the entrance on the highest tier Brazilian people.
Okay, I want to stop the audio right here just to explain. You know, he said he's from a city called Belo Horizonte, which is located in Minas Gerais, which is a state in southeastern Brazil. It's south of Bahia, and it's a little bit to the north, if I'm not mistaken, of from the state of Sao Paulo. You know, I've been to Belo Horizonte a number of times. I really love the city. Belo Horizonte is one of those cities where if cities like Sao Paulo or Rio are too big, you know, Minas Gerais, Belo Horizonte is the capital city of Minas Gerais, and it has, if I'm not mistaken, I think between probably about 2.5 million people. Of course, many more if you include the metropolitan area of Belo Horizonte, but I've been there maybe 4 times, and I've visited other cities in Minas Gerais. It's I haven't looked at this lately, but the last I saw, Belo Horizonte might be anywhere between the 5th and 8th most populous. I'm saying Belo Horizonte, the capital city of Minas Gerais. It may be somewhere between the 5th and the 8th largest city in Brazil. People who get interested in Brazil, they often end up going to places like Rio. Some go to Sao Paulo. A lot of people like to visit Salvador Bahia. But in the same way that I tell Brazilians that they need to expand beyond just knowing places like New York and where else do they go? New Jersey or Massachusetts or Miami, these type of places. I'm like, there are a lot of other American cities that you would enjoy visiting. You know, like, I don't know, Belo Horizonte is kind of like a Chicago to me in some ways. I mean, it doesn't have the same commercial appeal of a Chicago, but I'm saying in terms of size, it's a city it's a big city, but it's not super. It's just, you know, overly populated like a place like, you know, say Sao Paulo or New York. So love Belo Horizonte. You've been there a number of times. So just wanted to a lot of people may have never heard of the city Belo Horizonte or the state Minas Gerais, but that's where he's from. So let's keep it going.
You know, the elites, I'm not there. I don't have any contacts there, but I know how they move. I know how they operate. But I'm now here with middle class, upper middle class, and poor people. So I think I could add some information that could be valuable to this discussion or even clarify some things. And I want to start to make a quick disclaimer to your audience. First, foremost, I'm not here uh, promoting anything. You know, I will just explain how this prostitution happens in Brazil and how hypocrite this thing is. And I also not hating on the guys that come down here, passport bros or even regular dudes come to Brazil to visit. Um, they are welcome. No one in Brazil on the head pill community or manosphere community will be, you know, making videos and, you know, threatening American guys for coming down here and do what they are doing. We don't care about this stuff. We really don't care because they are dealing with low tier women anyway. But here's the thing: uh, when things like that happens, uh, it's a whole mess because the same way we don't like that this image, this bad image that Brazil got worldwide about being a very sexual country, the women are easy and sex tourism thing. We don't like this tag on Brazil. We don't like this stuff in Brazil.
Let me interject a few things here. If you heard what he said, what he said was in general, Brazilian men don't care that these guys are coming to Brazil to pick up or talk to or I don't know, develop relationships or have sexual relations with these Brazilian women because he's saying he believes that most of these tourists that are coming to Brazil and they're dealing with Brazilian women, they're dealing with what he calls low tier women. I don't know. I think what he means by that is not necessarily the women that have a whole lot going on in their lives per se. He's probably saying not the girls who are in, pursuing like, bachelor's, masters, and PhDs, not the type of women who come from, say upper crust families or have a lot going on, in terms of their career success or whatever. He's saying that in reality, I know that, I've read some of these things online. There's a lot of talk about this right now, the type of women that, American men are getting with when they come to Brazil. I can't speak for all of them, but I've heard just numerous stories of brothers who I've known who from the United States who have gone down to Brazil and they come back talking about their escapades. And so it just lets me know that they are dealing with a certain class of women in Brazil. I'm not going to mention any names, but I know plenty of guys who come back from Brazil. They go there during Carnival. Obviously there's a lot of sex going on during Carnival. They get to know certain people in Brazil that take them to spots where they can pick up prostitutes, what Brazilians call the garotas de programa. They're just like, call girls. Now, again, I have to always stress, I'm not saying every Black man from the United States goes to Brazil is participating in this, but we also can't deny that there aren't men who go down there specifically for this purpose. So what he's saying is like, these are the women that are already in that life. And that's not to say all Brazilian women are in that life. This is part of the problem that we have to discuss. Because when you have women that participate in a certain lifestyle and then you try to judge all of the women from that country as participating in that lifestyle. That's an error. It's kind of like, you know, all people believing that all African Americans are into a certain lifestyle when we're a very diverse people. The same way that, you know, African Americans would probably be offended by being typecast as everybody in the group being a certain way. I look at that in the same way. If you go into another country, you can't just look at all of the women or all of the men or the entire population as being into a certain lifestyle, because Brazil is a very diverse country. You meet all types of men and women there. So I think that's what he's getting at. Now, the other thing that he pointed out, and this is something that I've been exploring a little bit more lately on my blog, and that's what he was talking about when he got into the question of, you know, prostitution, sexual tourism, and the idea that Brazilian women are easy. You know, this is something that I've been approaching recently in a number of articles. Let's take a look at a couple of them. Okay, so here are a couple of articles that deal with the question of sexual tourism. This is, you know, these are, you know, there's old and there's new articles on this blog that, you know, this was from 2014. The article was called "It's Time to Give a Red Card to Sexual Tourism. My Flesh Doesn't Belong to Carnival nor the World Cup." This is a message that, you know, a lot of Brazilian women wanted the world to know, because Brazil was the site for a lot of tourists coming into the country in 2014 for the World Cup. And so, you know, with this image of the sexually available Brazilian women, there was a parcel of the population that says, no, our bodies are not for sale. There was a documentary some years ago that talked about the realities and aspirations in the sexual tourism industry of Brazil's Northeast. Intriguing documentary. You know, a lot of girls have this hope in their mind that a foreign man will come to Brazil and rescue them and change their lives by taking them to another country. Again, let's keep in mind, all Brazilian women are not wanting to leave the country. There are some, yes, there are. Matter of fact, there are a lot. But that doesn't mean every Brazilian woman wants to leave the country. So that's another myth. You can't judge all of the people as having that ideal. In my time in Brazil, I've spoken to a lot of people who had the aspiration of visiting the United States, but from the things that they've read and the things that they heard, they had no aspiration of living in the country, right? When you talk about the idea of Brazilian women being quote unquote easy, and this is what the question is here: why do foreigners see Brazilian women as sex objects? That's the whole thing that they were exploring in this particular piece. It's the point that a lot of Brazilian women go to other countries. I was reading about this the other day. A girl had written this in one of the social networks, and she said that unfortunately, you know, a lot of my American friends, this is a Brazilian girl talking, and she says, you know, in the United States, in certain areas of the United States, Brazilian women have a very vulgar image. And this is the same thing you hear coming out of Europe. So it's unfortunate, because when you get this certain class of Brazilian women overseas and they're promoting a certain lifestyle, they're participating in prostitution, this is the image that people around the world will have of Brazilian women as a whole. And I just spoke about that. That's not something that's not necessarily fair, to judge a whole country of women based on a parcel of the population, right? There was something else that he said. Let me see if there's anything else that I need to speak on from articles here. This is intriguing. Study finds that Black women suffer prejudice even in the world of prostitution. Yeah. So, you know, there's a lot that can be said here. There's plenty of articles here where I've talked about this, and this is going to get even more. I'm going to be putting even more material up about this, because it seems that there's a lot of people that's intrigued with the topic. So another, just connecting to this question of sexual tourism and the image of the Brazilian woman, I also want to talk about one particular singer. So this singer that I want to talk about is, you know, I posted a video about her, I don't know, maybe a couple months ago, talking about Anitta. Anitta is probably the most well-known Brazilian outside of the country right now. You know, unless you want to count like Gisele Bündchen, who's been in the news because of her divorce from who's considered the greatest quarterback of all time, Tom Brady. But Anitta has built a career, and she's based it on having a very sexualized image. You know, you always see her shaking her ass, you know, on TV. She's always involved in sexual situations in her videos. She strikes poses. She's openly talking about her own sexuality, who she's sleeping with or whatever. But, everybody's not impressed with, not all Brazilians, even though Anitta has earned a lot of money, over since her career started, I think in about 2014. She's one of the richest Brazilian women in the country. But you see this article, it says singer Anitta is a superstar, but for some, she is a terrible example with which to educate girls, but that modern women feminists turned a blind eye. So everybody's not happy about what Anitta represents for Brazilian women around the world. There's a really good blog that I like to follow every now and then, and they go in on Anitta. It's like, okay, you can look and say she's earning a lot of money, but at the same time, is this the image that she presents? Is this something that you would want your daughter to grow up to be? This is just, it's an honest question. This is something I'm going to be talking about in the next couple of articles, because the whole question that's going on with this passport bro, and particularly, the guy that's in the middle of a hailstorm of negative publicity, Austin Holloman. My question is, I can't condone the things that he did, but at the same time, look at the society as a whole. We can't just look at one person and say, look what he did. It's like, okay, in the realm of society, the highly sexualized societies that we live in, and the degradation of society right now, how can we just blame one person? I'm gonna explore that topic a little bit more later on, but that's something that I really want to get into, because I feel like as pornified as the world has become in the last few decades, you can't really blame one person for behaving in a manner that's become so acceptable around the world these days. I'll explore that argument a little bit more in the future. I want to stick to what I'm talking about here. So let's continue to listen to what JJ has to say about this topic.
But we have here also guys that do this overseas, and I'm gonna mention two quick big case that happened with Brazilian guys overseas doing this shit, the same shit that Austin was doing here. One case that I remember was in 2018 during the World Cup in Russia. Some Brazilian guys think that was okay being on the streets and talking with women and recording it. They were talking about people that was enjoying World Cup, and they got close to some Russian girls, blonde, and they were recording them and talking in Portuguese, and they were talking things in Portuguese that mentioned their coochies. They were saying things like, "Say with me, your coochie is pink," but they were talking. They were saying these in Portuguese, and obviously the Russian chicks didn't know what they were talking about. And this thing went viral. And all of Brazil people got mad at these guys. This thing got so big that even the Russian government got aware about the situation and expelled the guys from the country. And when they came back in Brazil, they lost their jobs. They received lots of death threats. They got canceled mad. They got really mad canceled.
So what he's talking about is groups of Brazilian men in the streets in Russia. And they were just walking up on blonde Russian women in the streets and making all of these suggestive comments, putting these women on video and having them repeat certain phrases in Portuguese, right? Let me see if I can find a few of them. Let me see. The one guy was talking to women, talking to one of the Russian women, and he says, "Repeat after me. You're going to give it to everybody in Montes Claros, which was a city that he was from also in the state of Minas Gerais." Then you have this whole thing where it says here, okay, so a woman that apparently didn't speak and understand Portuguese is surrounded by Brazilian men who are dressed in the national team green and yellow jerseys, and they're screaming in chorus. We'll say pink. How can I say this without being too vulgar, right? Pink P, we'll say, referring to the woman's genitalia. What else do we have here? Now, see, this is what I'm talking about. Look at this website right here. This is the Universa UOL. This is a violence against women article. But this is what I was saying before. The world that we live in has been so highly sexualized. You come to this site. Now, this is for only people who have a subscription to the site. And I haven't, I'm not interested in reading this material, but every day, once a week, they always have some sexually explicit material on the website for only subscribers, people who are paying. So this is what I'm saying in the context of the highly sexualized world that we live in. How can we really just, lose it over what one guy did? I'm not saying I'm condoning what he did, but I'm just saying he is just part of the culture that we're in. We're all in the abyss. And let me see what else we got here. So the point was, these Brazilian men were walking through the streets of Russia and having these Russian women who didn't understand Portuguese, say these things into the camera. And then they just just laughed about it. They were just making fun of it. People accused them of being, macho, machista, sexist, right? And so the comment here says, I don't know who's talking here at this point. Let me see. It's a lawyer from like the Brazilian Lawyers Guild, and it says the prejudice attitude was the cause of shame for all of us Brazilians. So, a lot of Brazilians were offended with what they did over in Russia. These guys came back home, back to Brazil, and I don't know how many of them, but a couple of those guys, if not all of them, got fired from their jobs. Now, there's another piece to this point. Now, there's another piece to this story that I also want to point out. This is something, I didn't read this article back in 2018, the article that I just saw. I was familiar with what happened. I read it earlier today when I was doing some research on what they were talking about, right? I think this is, the journalist's name is Isabella Hayes. So this is Isabella Hayes. Okay, so this is her talking. She's reacting to what was, what went down in Russia, what these Brazilian men were saying as they approached these Russian women in the streets. So this is Isabella, the journalist Isabella Hayes. So what does she say? Again, look at some of the stuff that you'll see on just a mainstream website. Of course, this is for people who subscribe and who pay a monthly fee for the material. But I'm just saying, again, this is what I'm saying, the pornification of the world that we live in. So he said, this is what the journalist says, a black journalist. She says, when a man chooses a woman because her genitalia or her breasts are pink, he is excluding from the radar all the Black women that have genitalia and breasts that are brown, beige, or dark. When you limit your partners because of the color of the vajayjay, you are excluding any type of relationship with Black women, right? That's intriguing that she approached it that way. But in some way, okay, I understand what she's talking about, because there was a piece that I put up some years ago that I'm like, it just kind of struck me as to how personal the woman got about the article, talking about the color of Black women's genitalia. Let's take a look at that article real quick. So this is an article I put up from 2015. The article is called Freeing One's Mind from the Adoration of Whiteness. After numerous relationships of sexual exploitation at the hands of white men, woman learns the liberating power of Black love. There's a lot going on just in that title alone. First of all, talking about, again, I've stressed this throughout the blog for all these years, that Black and brown Brazilians have been taught for a long time. They've been taught this adoration of whiteness. They've been taught that you need to whiten a family by marrying whiter partners. So within a few generations, your offspring, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren will eventually look white. So the adoration of whiteness. It's only been, I'll say in the last few decades, that a lot of Black Brazilians have been waking up to this social engineering within their own families that says, look, don't bring another Black person home. You need to get with a white woman or a white man that can help whiten our family line. How many times do I have to mention the famous picture of Ham's redemption? Now, if you know the story of Ham in the Bible, Ham was said to be cursed, So the painting is called Ham's redemption, and it's basically saying that Ham's descendants can redeem themselves by whitening their bloodline. I've talked about that photo numerous times. Check out some of my other videos that go into this. But again, the adoration of whiteness. After numerous relationships of sexual exploitation at the hands of white men. Again, this is a Black woman talking about how many white men she laid down with because she was taught to adore white men. It's only been in recent years that Black Brazilians, and even still, it's a small percentage of Black Brazilians who are calling for what they call amor afrocentrado, which means Afrocentric love. We should be looking for people who look like us so that we can bond, so that we can rebuild the love of our Blackness that was stripped away from us because of years of pushing this white agenda, this decades of Brazilian culture telling you need to whiten your family. This only been in recent years that I've seen open calls for Black people to start loving each other in Brazil. And this is what the rest of the article, the title in this article says so much. Woman learns the liberating power of Black love. I would love to interview this woman. Maybe I'll reach out to her one day. This is not her. This is just a picture I put on here. But I thought it was very fitting of the article. So this is a story by somebody named Ana Claudia Silva. Listen to what she says. In 24 years, I had never thought of maintaining a relacionamento afrocentrado, Afro-centered or Afrocentric relationship. I have always seen and thought white men were much more attractive and cleaner than Black men. I always said that I liked a pink penis because of the quite disgusting purple of my vajayjay. Among other bad things I spoke and thought. In all my interracial relationships that were for dating or ficadas, meaning just like, hookups or casual sex, I always accepted being called moreninha and ultimately accepted even being called encargida or dingy, not by my ex, but by a female friend of those times who lived more in my house than in her own and interfered in a relationship that already wasn't good. Listen to what she's saying here. She went as far as to say she was disgusted by the color of her own genitalia. She said she liked only pink penises. Like, where does that come from? I mean, just think about the indoctrination that you have here, where Black men and women are both taught to more appreciate whiteness and the pink undertone of European descendant people. What's intriguing about this, if you notice, is that in the video from Russia, or rather the article from Russia, these were quote unquote white Brazilian men. And we know that a lot of men who consider themselves white in Brazil aren't not quite white. So again, it speaks to this question of Brazilians. A lot of white Brazilians don't even feel 100% white. They don't feel that their whiteness can compete with the whiteness of, say, American whites or European whites. There were some articles back from the 1950s that talked about the inferior whiteness that a lot of white Brazilians feel because they know in their racial background and their family tree, they have either indigenous or African blood. So people will look at them and be like, well, they travel outside of Brazil and people will know, like, okay, we don't know what you really are, but you're definitely not white. And so a group of white Brazilian men walking around in Russia talking about, pink vajayjay, the entire population, whether it's the Black, brown, or white, and they all have an adoration for the ultimate level of whiteness. And as the journalist was saying, like, wow, if these men are discriminating women based on the color of their genitalia, that also leaves Black women out, because it's like Black women are going to be discriminated against because of their color, because of their hair texture, because of other parcels of their phenotype. Black women in Brazil have an image of you only have sex with Black women, you don't marry them. So this is very revealing because this shows that this complex about attaining a certain level of whiteness doesn't just affect just Black and brown people. White Brazilians also often feel this way if they can look themselves in the mirror and say, okay, I say I'm white, I classify myself as white, but I know deep down that I'm not really as white as other white people around the world. And this is what you see when these Brazilian men are in Russia and they're making jokes about a woman's pink genitalia. This is so deep. This alone could be something for an analysis of a whole blog post.